Title: The Dark Forest and the Messenger of Light. The wind whispered through the dark trees, their twisted branches reaching towards the sky like skeletal fingers. Deep within the heart of the ancient forest, shadows shifted and murmured as if alive, hiding secrets long forgotten. It was here that the tale began, in a place where the sun's rays never reached the forest floor, and where the air was thick with an unspoken dread. The villagers spoke of this forest with fear and reverence, for none who entered had ever returned unchanged. At the edge of this realm stood a small, crumbling cottage, the last human refuge before the darkness took hold. It was here that a lone figure waited, a young woman named Alara, who had come to seek the truth hidden within the forest. Alara had heard the stories from her elders, tales of a curse cast long ago. A darkness that had consumed the land and turned the once thriving woods into a place of fear. Yet, despite the warnings, Alara felt a strange pull towards it, an irresistible call that beckoned her deeper into its heart. "Am I truly ready for this?" she whispered to herself, tightening her cloak as the cold wind stirred. She stepped forward, her heart racing with anticipation and dread. The deeper Alara ventured into the forest, the more oppressive the air became. The trees seemed to close in around her, their gnarled roots twisting underfoot like the fingers of forgotten spirits. The light grew dimmer with every step, until the only illumination came from the faint glow of moss on the trees and the distant flicker of stars far above. She had been walking for what felt like hours when she first noticed a flicker of light in the distance. It was faint, but unmistakable, like the glow of a lantern. Her pulse quickened, and she hurried towards it, her feet stumbling over the uneven ground. As she drew closer, the light grew brighter, and soon, she found herself standing in a small clearing, where the trees parted just enough to reveal a figure standing in the center. The figure was cloaked in a garment of pure light, and its face was hidden beneath a hood. "The messenger of light. You have come," the figure said in a voice that resonated with both power and calm, as if it were the very essence of peace itself. Alara stood frozen, the weight of her quest pressing down on her shoulders. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I am the messenger of light," the figure replied. "I have watched over this forest for centuries, waiting for one brave enough to face the darkness that lies within." "But why me?" Alara asked, her mind racing with confusion and wonder. "I am just a girl from the village. I have no strength, no magic." The figure tilted its head slightly, as though contemplating her words. "You are more than you know. You have the courage to seek the truth, even when the truth is buried in shadow. That is why you have come." The messenger of light raised a hand, and the air around them shimmered with energy. The ground beneath Alara's feet began to tremble, and the trees seemed to sway as if alive. Suddenly, the forest around them shifted, revealing an ancient stone altar hidden beneath the earth, its surface etched with glowing runes. "This," the messenger said, "is the source of the curse. It was once a place of great power, a place where light and dark coexisted in balance. But over time, the darkness grew stronger, fed by the fear and hatred of those who sought to control it." The altar pulsed with energy, and Alara felt a wave of cold wash over her. "What happened?" she whispered. "The darkness consumed the guardian of the forest," the messenger explained. "A powerful being, known as the heart of the forest, was tasked with keeping the balance. But when the heart was corrupted, the forest itself became a prison for the lost and the damned." Alara's heart sank as she gazed upon the altar. "How can I help? How can I end this?" "You must awaken the heart of the forest," the messenger said, its voice solemn. "Only then will the balance be restored. But be warned, for the darkness will not relinquish its hold easily. You must face it head on." With a deep breath, Alara stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. As she touched the altar, the ground trembled, and a deep, rumbling voice echoed through the forest. "You dare to challenge me?" the voice growled. It was the voice of the darkness itself, ancient and filled with malice. "You are nothing but a mortal. You cannot defeat me." But Alara did not falter. She could feel the power of the messenger surrounding her, and she drew strength from that light. "I will not let fear rule me," she declared, her voice steady. "I will bring the light back to this forest." The darkness recoiled, its form shifting and writhing, but Alara stood firm, her hand resting on the glowing runes of the altar. Slowly, the light within her began to grow, and the darkness shrank back, hissing in anger. "You cannot hide forever," Alara whispered. "The light will always find a way." With a final surge of energy, the altar exploded in a burst of light, and the darkness screamed, vanishing into the air. The trees began to shift, their twisted forms slowly returning to their original, majestic state. The air grew warm, and the forest, once silent and foreboding, began to hum with life once more. Alara stood in the clearing, her heart filled with a sense of peace she had never known. The messenger of light stood beside her, its form now glowing even brighter than before. "You have done it," the messenger said, its voice filled with pride. "The balance has been restored. The forest is free." Alara smiled, the weight of her journey finally lifting. "I couldn't have done it without you." "You did not need me," the messenger replied. "You had the strength within you all along. The light was always within you." As the first rays of dawn broke through the trees, Alara turned to leave, knowing that her journey had only just begun. The darkness had been vanquished, but there were many more mysteries in the world to uncover, many more challenges to face. And she was ready. Alara made her way back through the now luminous forest, her heart light and her spirit soaring. The once dark trees, now bathed in the golden light of the rising sun, stood tall and proud, their twisted forms replaced with graceful, towering giants. The forest no longer felt like a prison, but a place of growth and peace. As she approached the village, the people, who had long feared the woods and its curse, began to notice the change. The air felt different, lighter, purer. The oppressive silence that had once hung over the land had lifted, replaced by the gentle sounds of birds singing and the rustling of leaves. When Alara stepped into the village, the elders and the children gathered around her, their faces full of awe and wonder. "Alara," one elder said, her voice trembling, "you have returned. What happened in the forest?" Alara smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "The curse is broken. The darkness is gone. The forest is free." The villagers gasped in disbelief, their eyes wide with wonder. They had lived for so long in fear, knowing that the forest was cursed, but now, they saw that the land could be saved. They had witnessed the impossible, and it was all because of one person, Alara. The elder placed a hand on Alara's shoulder, her voice filled with gratitude. "You have done what we thought could never be done. You have saved us all." But Alara, ever humble, shook her head. "I was not alone. The messenger of light guided me, and the strength I found within myself came from the belief that light can always overcome darkness." As the days passed, the village began to flourish once again. The crops grew, the rivers ran clear, and the people began to rebuild the lives they had once abandoned. The dark cloud that had loomed over them for generations had lifted, and hope was restored. But Alara knew that her journey was not over. The messenger of light had given her more than just the gift of courage. It had shown her that there was always a balance between light and darkness, and that maintaining that balance would require constant vigilance. One evening, as Alara stood at the edge of the forest, gazing at the now peaceful landscape, the messenger appeared before her once more, its form glowing softly in the twilight. "You have done well, Alara," the messenger said. But the journey is never truly finished. There will always be darkness to face, and light to guide you. Alara nodded, understanding the weight of the words. I will continue to protect this land. I will make sure that the balance is kept. The messenger smiled, a soft, warm light radiating from its being. You are ready. The light you carry will always find its way, even in the darkest of times. With that, the messenger faded into the shadows, leaving Alara with a renewed sense of purpose. Years passed, and Alara became a legend in her own right. The village flourished under her watchful eye, and the forest once feared and shrouded in darkness became a symbol of hope and rebirth. Alara never forgot the lessons she had learned during her journey. She became a protector of the land, always vigilant against the forces that threatened to upset the balance between light and darkness. And as time went on, she became known not just as a hero, but as the guardian of the forest, the one who had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. But even as she grew older, Alara knew that her journey was far from over. The messenger of light had shown her the truth that there would always be new challenges, new battles to fight. And so, she continued to walk the path of light, knowing that it was her duty to protect not just the forest, but all that was good in the world. And so, the story of Alara, the messenger of light, and the dark forest became a tale passed down through generations. It was a story of courage, of hope, and of the belief that even in the darkest of times, there is always a light that will guide the way. Though Alara had successfully restored balance and peace, her role as the guardian of the forest was not without its challenges. As time passed, whispers began to spread, not of the darkness that had once consumed the land, but of a new and more insidious threat. This shadow was not of the forest or the creatures that dwelled within it. It was a force that lingered just beyond sight, hiding in the hearts of those who had once feared the forest's curse. One evening, as Alara walked along the newly restored paths of the forest, she felt a disturbance in the air. It was subtle, like a shift in the wind, but her senses honed through her years of guarding the land told her that something was amiss. The forest had fallen silent once more, the birds had stopped singing, and even the wind had ceased to move through the trees. The familiar voice of the messenger of light appeared in her mind, as though it had always been there, waiting to speak. Alara, the time has come to face the shadows that have yet to be revealed. The balance you restored is not eternal unless it is tended to. Darkness can seep into the hearts of men, and with it, new trials will come. Alara's heart raced, for she knew the messenger spoke of a danger far greater than what had been fought before. This was not a battle of physical might, but of the very hearts and minds of those who had once been touched by darkness. Where should I begin? Alara asked, her voice quiet but firm, as she gazed into the trees, sensing an ancient force stirring. You must seek out the hidden temple, the messenger answered. There, you will find the key to understanding the nature of the shadow that threatens to break the balance. Alara set out at once, following the guidance of the messenger, with her mind filled with questions. The hidden temple was a place spoken of in old legends, said to lie beyond the reaches of the forest and into the mountains that bordered the land. Few had ever found it, and fewer still had returned from its shadowed halls. The path was long, and the journey took her across dangerous terrain, through windswept deserts, over craggy hills, and across rushing rivers. As Alara pressed on, she could feel the weight of her mission bearing down on her, and yet, she did not falter. Her resolve was stronger than ever, for she knew the peace of the land and the lives of those she protected depended on her success. When she finally reached the hidden temple, nestled between towering peaks, she stood before its massive stone doors. The air around it hummed with an energy that felt both ancient and unsettling. It was a place of power, and Alara could sense that whatever lay within would be the key to understanding the shadows that threatened her world. With a steady breath, Alara pushed open the doors and stepped inside. Inside the temple, the air was thick with silence, the stone walls lined with intricate carvings and forgotten symbols. Alara walked deeper into the heart of the temple, her footsteps echoing in the vast hall. The atmosphere was heavy with the weight of history and mystery, and yet, she pressed on, knowing she had no choice but to face whatever awaited her. In the center of the temple stood an altar, at the base of which rested a large, obsidian stone. The stone pulsed with an eerie light, its surface swirling with darkness, as if it contained a living, breathing force. As Alara approached, the voice of the messenger of light whispered in her mind once again. "This is the Shadow Stone, the source of the dark influence you now feel. It was created eons ago by those who sought to control the forces of light and darkness, but in doing so, they unknowingly unleashed a force that would forever seek to unbalance the world." Alara knelt before the stone, her heart heavy with the knowledge of its power. "What must I do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You must bind the Shadow Stone once more," the messenger replied. "But beware, for the stone feeds on fear and doubt. It will seek to draw you into its depths, to make you question your very purpose. Only by confronting your deepest fears will you be able to seal it away forever." Alara's breath caught in her throat. To bind the Shadow Stone, she would have to face the darkness within herself, the doubts and fears she had long buried. As Alara placed her hands upon the Shadow Stone, a surge of dark energy filled the temple, and she was overwhelmed by visions. The darkness twisted and turned, showing her greatest fears, the forest. Consumed by shadow once again, the villagers lost to despair, the balance she had worked so hard to restore shattered. But in the midst of the chaos, a soft, familiar voice called to her. "Alara, remember the light within you. It is stronger than the shadows. Do not let them define you." It was the messenger of light. Alara closed her eyes and took a deep breath, focusing on the warmth that resided in her heart. She remembered the countless lives she had touched, the people who believed in her, and the love she felt for the world she had protected. The light she carried was not just hers, it was a gift to the world. With renewed strength, Alara pressed forward, not allowing the darkness to overtake her. She embraced the light within her, and with a final surge of energy, the Shadow Stone cracked open, releasing a burst of blinding light. The darkness within the temple shattered, and the stone dissolved into nothingness. The force that had held the balance in peril was gone. As the light faded, Alara stood before the altar, victorious yet weary. She had faced the darkest corners of her soul and emerged stronger, her connection to the light unbroken. As she left the hidden temple, Alara knew that the world would always face challenges both external and internal. But as long as she carried the light within her, she would continue to protect the balance between the light and the darkness. As Alara returned to the village, the first rays of the morning sun bathed the land in a warm golden glow. The once darkened sky now shimmered with hues of blue and pink, as if the world itself had been reborn. The villagers, who had long feared the shadows, stood in awe at the change. The air felt different, freer, lighter, as though the land itself had been cleansed. Alara walked into the village square, the familiar faces of the people she had protected greeting her with gratitude. The elders, the children, the farmers, and the artisans all gathered to see her. There was no longer fear in their eyes, but hope, for they had witnessed the power of light to conquer even the deepest darkness. The elder who had first spoken to her all those years ago approached, his voice filled with reverence. "Alara, we have all witnessed the battle you fought, not just against the darkness of the forest, but against the very shadows that reside within the heart of all things. You are more than a hero. You are the beacon of hope for us all." Alara smiled gently, but her eyes remained thoughtful. "It is not I who am the beacon," she said softly. "It is the light within each of us that shines the brightest. We are all capable of overcoming darkness, if we only remember the light." Her words struck deep into the hearts of the villagers. For they had come to understand the true meaning of her message. The fight against darkness was not always an external battle. It was one that began within, where doubt, fear, and despair could take root. But just as the light could overcome the darkness of the forest, so too could it overcome the shadows within their hearts. As the seasons passed, Alara continued to guide the village, teaching those around her to foster their inner light. She helped them rebuild not just their homes, but their spirits. The forest, once a place of fear and mystery, became a sacred land of growth and renewal. It was no longer a place of danger, but a place where the villagers could go to reconnect with nature, find solace, and even seek guidance. Word of Alara's deeds spread far and wide. Travelers and pilgrims began to make their way to the village, seeking the wisdom she had gained from her journey. They came from distant lands, drawn by the stories of the Guardian, who had defeated the Shadow Stone and who now taught others how to live in balance with light and darkness. Alara welcomed them all with open arms, sharing her knowledge and the lessons she had learned, that the struggle between light and darkness was not about winning or losing, but about maintaining harmony. It was about understanding that both light and darkness had a place in the world. And that true strength lay in knowing when to embrace each, when to fight, and when to let go. Years went by, and Alara grew older, though the light within her never dimmed. She had become a living legend, her name passed down through generations as a symbol of courage, wisdom, and hope. The village had transformed into a thriving community, a sanctuary where people could live in peace, no longer plagued by fear of the unknown. One evening, as Alara stood at the edge of the forest, looking out at the horizon, she felt a familiar presence beside her. It was the messenger of light, who had never left her side, though its form had become less tangible over the years. Appearing only in moments of deep reflection. "You have done well, Alara," the messenger said, its voice warm and filled with pride. "You have fulfilled your purpose. The darkness you once faced no longer threatens the land, for it has been sealed within the hearts of those who choose to fight it." Alara nodded, her eyes reflecting the twilight sky. "I have learned that true peace comes not from the absence of darkness, but from understanding its place. The world is a balance, and we must be willing to accept both the light and the shadow." The messenger smiled. "You have come to understand the deepest truth. You are now the embodiment of that balance. It is time for you to rest, knowing that your work will continue long after you are gone." Alara looked at the village below, the people living their lives, content and free from fear. She had given them the tools to maintain the peace, and now it was up to them to carry it forward. The legacy of light she had left behind would continue to grow, just as the forest had once grown, nurtured by the care of those who tended it. With a final, contented sigh, Alara closed her eyes. The wind carried the scent of the forest and the promise of new beginnings, and as she stepped into the embrace of the night, she knew that her journey, though it had come to an end, would live on in the hearts of those who carried the light. Years passed, and the village flourished in the harmony Alara had established. However, as the seasons changed, the whispers of a new challenge began to stir once again. The balance between light and dark was a fragile thing, and though peace had been restored, it was never meant to last forever without the vigilant guidance of a protector. In a distant corner of the land, a child was born with a unique gift, the ability to see both light and shadow with equal clarity. This child, named Leora, was born under the light of a rare celestial event, one that only occurred once every few centuries. Her birth was foretold in an ancient prophecy, one that spoke of a new guardian who would rise when the balance was in danger again. Leora grew up in the village, unaware of her destiny. She was kind-hearted and curious, always drawn to the forest and its mysteries, just as Alara had been. She would often wander along the paths Alara had once walked, her feet brushing the same earth that had been touched by the guardian's steps. But Leora's gift soon became apparent. She would see things that others could not, shadows that lingered in the corners of the village, light that flickered like a dying flame, and creatures that appeared in the depths of the forest, both beautiful and frightening. It was clear to those who knew the story of Alara that Leora was the next guardian, though she did not yet understand what that meant. One evening, as Leora sat by the edge of the village, gazing at the stars, she felt a strange pull within her chest, as though something inside her was awakening. She closed her eyes and, for a brief moment, the world around her seemed to vanish. When she opened them again, she saw a vision, a figure shrouded in light, standing in front of her. It was Alara, or at least, the vision of her, as if she had come to guide Leora in her moment of need. "Leora," the vision of Alara said, her voice warm but filled with purpose. "The time has come. You are the guardian now. The shadows that once threatened the world are stirring once more. You must go to the heart of the forest and face the darkness that lies hidden there. It is the legacy of what I fought against, and now it calls to you." Leora's heart raced. She had always felt a connection to the forest, but now, with this revelation, she understood that she was destined for something greater. The weight of her destiny pressed upon her, but she knew that she could not ignore the call. With the blessing of the village and the guidance of the memory of Alara, Leora set out toward the heart of the forest. As she journeyed deeper, the forest seemed to respond to her presence. The trees whispered her name, their leaves rustling with ancient knowledge, while the creatures watched from the shadows, curious but cautious. When she finally reached the heart of the forest, Leora found herself standing before an ancient tree, its bark twisted and gnarled, its roots stretching deep into the earth. This was the tree of the first light, the source of the forest's power. It was said that the tree held the memory of every guardian who had ever walked the land, and it was here that Leora would face her trial. The ground trembled beneath her feet as a dark shape began to materialize in front of her. It was not a physical creature, but a manifestation of the shadows that had once threatened to consume the land. The darkness took shape as a towering figure, its form ever changing, flickering between light and shadow, like a creature of nightmares. "I am the legacy," the shadow said, its voice a chilling echo of Alara's words. "I am the darkness that you cannot defeat, for I am within you. I am your fear, your doubt, your very weakness. You cannot escape me." Leora stood her ground, her heart racing, but she did not back down. "I am not afraid of you," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the terror that clawed at her. "I am the light that balances you. I will not be consumed." The shadow laughed, its form shifting as it reached toward her. "Then prove it, child of the light. Prove that you can wield the power of the guardian. Prove that you are worthy of the legacy of Alara." Leora closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She remembered the teachings of Alara, the lessons she had learned from the villagers, and the light within her own heart. The darkness could not consume what was already whole. The shadows fed on fear, doubt, and hatred, but Leora had no room for such things in her soul. With a fierce determination, Leora raised her hand, summoning the light that burned within her. A brilliant beam of pure light erupted from her fingertips, cutting through the darkness like a sword. The shadow screeched, recoiling from the light, but it did not vanish. "You cannot defeat me," the shadow hissed. "I am eternal. I am the darkness within all things." Leora's heart pounded as she gathered every ounce of strength within her. "No," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "You are not eternal. You are but a shadow. and shadows vanish when the light rises. With those words, Leora unleashed the full force of her power. The light surged from her, engulfing the shadow in a blinding brilliance. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still, and then, with a final, resounding cry, the shadow was gone, vanished back into the depths of the forest. As the light faded, Leora stood before the tree of the first light, breathing heavily, but victorious. The darkness had been vanquished, and the forest was once again at peace. She had proven herself, not by defeating the shadow with strength alone, but by embracing the balance between light and darkness within herself. The forest around her seemed to come alive, as if celebrating her victory. The birds began to sing once more, and the breeze carried the sweet scent of blooming flowers. The legacy of Alara had passed into Leora, and with it, the promise of continued peace. When Leora returned to the village, the people greeted her with open arms, their eyes filled with admiration and hope. She had proven that the light could endure, even in the face of darkness. And as she looked out over the land, she knew that her journey was just beginning, for the role of the guardian was never truly over. It was a legacy that would continue to guide and protect, for as long as the balance between light and dark existed. Though the forest had found peace once again, the whispers of the world around it told a different story. Leora, now the guardian of light and darkness, was aware of the delicate balance she had restored, but she also knew that true peace could never be static. It was a cycle, one that required constant vigilance and renewal. Leora's days were spent traveling between the village and the forest, learning from both, as the land itself became her teacher. She would visit the villagers, strengthening their connection with the light within their hearts, teaching them the ancient arts of balance that Alara had once shared with her. Her nights were spent in the forest, where she meditated beneath the ancient tree of the first light, calling upon the deep wisdom of the forest and listening to the spirits that resided within the land. But as the years went on, the shadows never fully vanished. They were always there, lingering in the corners of the world, waiting for a moment of weakness. They were not to be feared, but respected, for the darkness had its place in the great cycle of the world, just as light did. One day, as Leora stood in the forest, a feeling of unease settled in her heart. The forest, which had always whispered to her, was now silent. The air was still, and the leaves did not rustle as they once did. She closed her eyes, reaching out with her senses, but the world around her seemed to hold its breath, as though waiting for something to happen. Then, she heard it, a faint whisper, distant yet unmistakable. Leora. The voice came from far beyond the forest, a call from somewhere in the unknown. It was unlike anything she had ever heard before. There was power in it, a presence that stirred something deep within her soul. She knew at that moment that a new challenge awaited her, one that could not be ignored. Without hesitation, Leora set out on a journey beyond the borders of the forest, beyond the lands she had known. Her heart was filled with determination, for she understood that peace could not be taken for granted. There were forces at work in the world that she had yet to face, and it was her responsibility as the guardian to answer the call. Her path led her through strange and unfamiliar lands, where the balance of light and dark was in disarray. She encountered strange creatures, some of which were born from the shadows, while others were made of pure light. Each encounter tested her resolve, for the world beyond the forest was far more complicated than the simple battle between light and dark she had fought before. In the mountains, Leora met a group of travelers who spoke of an ancient temple hidden deep within the heart of a distant desert. There, they claimed, lay a relic of immense power, a relic that could shift the balance of the world itself. They warned her that this power was dangerous, and that it could either restore peace or plunge the world into chaos, depending on who wielded it. Leora, feeling the weight of this new responsibility, knew that she had to find this temple, to see the relic with her own eyes. But she also knew that she could not go alone. Leora returned to the village, knowing that the journey ahead would not be one she could complete on her own. She spoke to the elders, the warriors, and the wise ones who had long watched over the land. She gathered a group of trusted companions, each with their own strength, each with their own connection to the light and the shadow. There was Elias, a skilled archer who could summon the light of the dawn to pierce through any darkness. There was Verindor, a warrior whose blade was imbued with the power of the earth itself, able to strike down any enemy with unyielding force. And then there was Celine, a healer with the gift of seeing into the hearts of others, understanding the deepest wounds that could only be healed with compassion. Together, they set out on their journey, each step bringing them closer to the desert and the ancient temple that lay within it. They crossed vast plains, climbed treacherous mountains, and braved the scorching heat of the desert, their bonds growing stronger with each trial they faced. Finally, after many trials, Leora and her companions arrived at the temple. It was a vast structure, half buried in the sand, its walls covered in strange markings that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. The air around it was thick with ancient power, a presence both beautiful and terrifying. As they entered the temple, they could feel the pull of the relic, a powerful force that seemed to resonate with the deepest parts of their beings. But the further they ventured into the temple, the more they realized that this was no ordinary relic. It was a doorway, a portal that could open to other worlds, other realms, where light and darkness were not so easily defined. At the center of the temple stood an altar, upon which rested a crystal that glowed with an eerie, shifting light. As Leora stepped forward, the crystal began to hum, its energy vibrating through the very stones of the temple. "It is time," the crystal whispered, its voice a blend of light and shadow, the same voice that had called to Leora. With a deep breath, Leora placed her hand upon the crystal. In that moment, she felt the weight of the world's balance pressing against her. The crystal pulsed with energy, and the shadows around her began to shift, forming shapes that seemed to reach out toward her, testing her strength, her resolve, and her connection to both light and dark. As the temple shook with energy, the crystal's glow intensified, and Leora was faced with a choice: to use the power of the relic to reshape the world, to bend the forces of light and darkness to her will, or to seal the power away, allowing the cycle to continue as it always had. The shadows and the light swirled around her, each pulling her in different directions, each offering a different path. She could feel the weight of each choice, knowing that the fate of the world rested in her hands. With a steady heart, Leora made her decision. She would not bend the world to her will. She would let the cycle continue, allowing both light and darkness to find their place in the world. The balance, she knew, was what kept the world alive, and it was not hers to control. With one final push of her will, Leora sealed the power of the relic, returning the temple to its slumber. The crystal's glow faded, and the temple's energy quieted. The cycle would continue, as it always had, with each new guardian rising when the time was right. Leora and her companions returned home, their mission complete. Though the relic's power had been sealed, the journey had revealed something far more important: that balance was not something that could be controlled, but something that had to be maintained, nurtured, and respected. As Leora stood once more in the village square, looking out over the land, she felt the weight of her duty lift from her shoulders. She had faced the shadows, and in doing so, had reaffirmed the light within her. The world would continue to turn, and the guardians would rise and fall, but the light and darkness would always exist side by side, forever in balance. And in that balance, peace would always be found. Years passed since Leora's decision at the Temple of Shadows and Light. The village prospered under her watchful guidance, and the forest had become a place of peace once again. However, the balance she had fought so hard to protect was never something she could take for granted. For deep within the heart of the world, something was stirring. Leora often wandered through the village and the forest, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Her once young heart had grown weary, and she began to notice the subtle signs that the delicate equilibrium of the world was beginning to shift once again. The whispers of the forest no longer felt as comforting. They spoke of a coming storm, one that was not of her making. One night, as the moon cast its pale light over the land, Leora sensed the darkness creeping once more into the corners of the world. A cold wind swept through the trees, and the shadows seemed to grow longer, stretching toward her with an unnatural hunger. The once clear distinction between light and dark was blurring, and for the first time in years, Leora felt fear stir in her heart. She stood at the edge of the forest, looking out into the vast world beyond. The sky above was clouded, obscuring the stars, as though the heavens themselves were holding their breath. And then she saw a figure, cloaked in shadow, standing just beyond the tree line. Its presence was both familiar and terrifying. The figure stepped forward, its form becoming clearer. It was a figure she had thought lost to time, Alara, the guardian of darkness. But something was wrong. Alara's once bright eyes were now hollow, her skin pale and ashen, her voice cold as ice. Leora, Alara whispered, her voice a hollow echo of what it once was. The balance is breaking. The light has grown too strong, and the darkness has faded too far. It is time for the old ways to return. The world trembled under the weight of Alara's words. Leora felt the pull of the shadows, stronger than ever before. She knew she could not allow this imbalance to take hold, but the darkness that Alara had embraced was unlike anything she had ever faced. The winds howled as the two guardians stood facing one another. Light and shadow clashed, their energies colliding with a force that could shatter the world itself. The very ground beneath their feet trembled, and the trees of the forest groaned in protest. "You do not understand, Alara," Leora shouted, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "This is not the way. The balance must be maintained, not destroyed. Both light and dark have their place in this world." But Alara was resolute, her eyes burning with an intense, almost fanatical fervor. "You speak of balance, but balance can only exist in the void between the two. It is time for the darkness to reclaim its rightful place." The air between them crackled with energy, and in that moment, Leora knew that she could not allow the world to fall into this chaos. She had fought to protect the balance, and she would not let it slip away now. The battle raged on, neither side yielding. Leora's light clashed with Alara's shadow, creating blinding flashes of energy that lit up the forest. The ground cracked and split beneath their feet, and the very sky above seemed to fracture as the two forces collided. But then, as the battle reached its peak, something unexpected happened. In the midst of their struggle, Leora felt a sudden pulse of energy, a wave of power that neither came from her nor Alara. It was as though the world itself was responding to their clash, calling for an end. The ground beneath them split open, and a deep chasm appeared, swallowing both guardians into the earth below. For a moment, there was nothing but darkness. When Leora awoke, she found herself in an unfamiliar place. The landscape was alien, a vast void between light and shadow. She could see the faint glimmer of stars in the distance, but they were distant and unreachable, as though the world itself had been torn asunder. Alara was there, standing before her, but she was no longer the same. Her eyes had lost their madness, and her voice was filled with sorrow. "This place," she whispered, "is where the worlds meet. It is the space between light and shadow, where nothing exists except the raw potential of creation." Leora understood then the battle they had fought had not been one for domination, but for the future of the world itself. The chasm they had fallen into was not a grave, but a place of rebirth. The balance they had fought for was not one that could be maintained by force alone. It required sacrifice, and it required understanding. As the two guardians stood in the void, they realized that there was only one path forward, not as enemies, but as co-creators of a new world. Together, they would forge a future where both light and shadow could exist in harmony, where neither would dominate the other. They would become the keepers of the balance, guiding the world toward a future where the eternal cycle could continue. We have both been blinded by our own convictions, Leora said softly. But together, we can create something greater than what either of us could have achieved alone. Alara nodded, her gaze no longer filled with anger, but with a quiet understanding. Then let us rebuild, she said. Let us bring the world back into balance. With a wave of their hands, the void around them began to shift. The stars above began to realign, and the chasm beneath their feet began to close. Light and shadow began to intertwine, creating a new world, one that was both familiar and new. As Leora and Alara stood together, side by side, they knew that the balance they had fought for would never be easy. It would require constant vigilance, constant understanding. But they also knew that together, they could protect the world from the forces that sought to upset it. The world was beginning anew, and the guardians, both light and dark, would continue to watch over it, ensuring that the cycle remained unbroken, and that the balance of the universe would endure. As centuries passed, the balance that Leora and Alara fought to restore was preserved. The world flourished under their watchful eyes. The once war-torn forests, shadowed by darkness, began to bloom with new life. The rivers ran clear and strong, and the stars above shone brighter, casting their light upon all corners of the earth. Yet, beneath this peace, the guardians knew that their work was never truly done. From their place in the heavens, Leora and Alara observed the world below, both knowing that the forces of light and shadow would always be in constant struggle. But this was not a battle for domination, it was a dance of existence, a delicate balancing act that they would maintain for eternity. Every century, the two would descend from their celestial watch and walk among the people. They would visit the villages, speak with the leaders, and offer guidance when necessary. They became figures of legend, their names whispered in the winds, their stories passed down through generations. Yet, few knew the true weight of their responsibilities. On one such visit, Leora found herself in a small village nestled in the valley between two towering mountain ranges. The village was peaceful, untouched by war, but the land was beginning to show signs of imbalance. The crops were failing in some areas, while others flourished unnaturally. The people were growing restless, wondering if the old stories of balance were just that, stories. Leora walked quietly among them, listening to their concerns. As she passed a group of children playing by the river, one child approached her, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Are you a guardian?" the child asked, his voice filled with awe. Leora smiled gently, kneeling down to meet his gaze. "I am one who watches over this world, yes," she replied. "But the true guardians are not just those who watch from above. The guardians are all of us, in the choices we make and the lives we lead." The child's face lit up, and he nodded, his imagination soaring. But in the depths of Leora's heart, a quiet concern stirred. She sensed that the darkness was returning, not as a shadow to be fought, but as a force of chaos, threatening the world once again. She knew it was only a matter of time before the next test would come. Back at the heart of the forest, Alara stood at the edge of a great chasm, her hands outstretched. The winds howled, carrying with them a faint whisper, a warning of what was to come. It was a call she had not heard in centuries, a warning from the very core of the earth itself. "It is beginning again," Alara murmured to herself. "The balance is slipping. The darkness rises not to conquer, but to unravel. It seeks to return the world to the void, to the place where light and shadow do not exist in harmony, but are forever separated." Leora appeared beside her, her face grim. "We have maintained this balance for so long, but now, even the fabric of the world begins to tear. What is this force that seeks to undo everything we have worked for?" Alara turned to her, her eyes filled with a quiet sorrow. "It is not an enemy we can fight. It is not something we can conquer. It is the end of an age, a shift that we must allow to happen." As the days passed, the Guardians felt the growing instability in the world around them. The once stable villages began to suffer strange occurrences. Animals, once peaceful, began to act erratically. The stars in the sky flickered, growing dimmer with each passing night. The world was slipping into a time of uncertainty, and the people were beginning to lose faith. One day, in a secluded valley, Leora and Alara found themselves standing before an ancient stone altar. It was a place they had visited once before, centuries ago. Here, they had made the choice to sacrifice their own personal desires for the greater good. Now, once again, they stood at a crossroads. "What is it we must do?" Leora asked, her voice filled with both determination and fear. Alara placed her hand on the altar, feeling its ancient power pulsing beneath her fingertips. "We must choose the path of sacrifice once more. To restore the balance, one of us must descend into the void to become one with the darkness, to seal away the chaos once and for all. It is the only way." Leora's heart clenched at the thought of losing her friend, her partner in this eternal battle. "But Alara, we've already made this sacrifice once. Is it not enough?" Alara's gaze softened. "It will never be enough, not unless we take the final step. The world needs us, but it needs both light and darkness, even more than it needs the Guardians themselves." The decision was made. In a final, quiet moment of understanding, Leora and Alara prepared to face the void together. They would both sacrifice their essence, melding their powers of light and darkness into one, sealing the forces of chaos away for eternity. But before they left, they looked once more upon the world they had sworn to protect. The stars above began to shine brighter, and for a brief moment, the balance between light and dark seemed perfect once again. With a final whisper of words, Leora and Alara vanished into the void, leaving behind a world that would remember their sacrifice forever. As the last echoes of their sacrifice faded into the stillness of the void, the world held its breath. For a time, there was silence. The imbalance that had threatened to tear apart the fabric of existence began to heal, and the forces of light and shadow settled into a fragile harmony once more. The people, though unaware of the Guardian's ultimate sacrifice, felt the change. The air was different, calmer, softer. The world seemed to exhale, as though it had been holding its breath for centuries. In the heart of the forest, the ancient trees whispered among themselves, their leaves shimmering with a quiet energy. The rivers flowed steadily once more, and the skies cleared, revealing a breathtaking, endless expanse of stars. The balance had been restored, but the world would never be the same. Centuries passed, and the memory of the Guardians' deeds faded into legend. The villages thrived, the kingdoms grew, and the story of the light and dark Guardians became an ancient myth. But even as time marched forward, the world held onto the delicate thread of balance that Leora and Alara had woven. In a small village, nestled near the very forest where the Guardians once walked, a young girl sat at the edge of a river. Her name was Mira, and she was unlike any child in her village. While others played and laughed, she often found herself drawn to the river's edge, gazing into the depths of its clear waters. It was as though the river called to her, as if it carried with it a secret only she could hear. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Mira saw something strange, a faint glow in the water, a shimmer that seemed to pulse with life. She leaned closer, her heart racing with curiosity, and as her fingers brushed the surface, the water rippled, revealing a vision of two figures standing on a distant mountain. One was bathed in light, the other in shadow, their silhouettes both familiar and mysterious. Mira gasped as the vision faded, leaving only a faint glow in the water. The air around her seemed to hum with an unseen energy. She had seen the figures before, in the old stories her grandmother had told her. They were the guardians, the light and dark, the protectors of balance. But why were they appearing to her now? Confused and filled with wonder, Mira sought out her grandmother, the village elder, hoping for answers. The old woman, whose eyes had seen many winters, listened quietly as Mira recounted what she had seen. "The time has come, child," the grandmother said, her voice soft but firm. "The guardians are not gone. They are with us, in the very fabric of the world. And now, it is time for someone new to take up their mantle." Mira's heart quickened. "But I'm just a child. I don't understand. How can I?" Her grandmother smiled gently. "It is not about understanding, Mira. It is about feeling the balance. You have always felt it, haven't you? The pull of the river, the quiet whisper of the forest. The guardians chose you, child. Now it is your turn to listen, to follow the call, and to bring harmony once more." Over the course of the next few months, Mira began to learn what her grandmother had meant. She trained, not in the ways of a warrior, but in the ways of the heart. She learned to listen to the whispers of the forest, to feel the rhythm of the earth, and to understand the delicate balance between light and darkness. It was a journey of the spirit, not the body, and with each passing day, Mira grew stronger. One fateful night, as she stood at the edge of the same river, a familiar glow began to shimmer once more. This time, the vision was clearer, more vivid. Leora and Alara stood before her, not as distant figures in a myth, but as real as the stars above. The light and dark guardians, united in their power, yet tempered by their sacrifice. "It is your turn now, Mira," Leora's voice rang out, soft but commanding. "You are the bridge between the two worlds, the keeper of the balance. The darkness and the light are within you, as they were within us. You must guide the world once more." Mira stepped forward, her heart filled with awe. "But I am only a child. How can I do this?" Alara's voice echoed in her mind. "You are not alone, Mira. You never have been. We are always with you, in the light, in the dark, in every breath of wind and every heartbeat. Trust in yourself. Trust in the balance." With those final words, the vision faded, leaving Mira standing at the river's edge, a sense of purpose filling her being. She knew now that the journey ahead would not be easy. She would face trials, just as the guardians had. But she also knew that she was not alone. The light and dark were within her, and with that power, she would protect the balance of the world. And so, the cycle began anew. Mira became the guardian, the new protector of balance, walking in the footsteps of those who had come before her. The world would continue to turn, its balance teetering between light and darkness. But with Mira's guidance, the forces would always find their harmony. The story of the guardians, once just a myth, became a living truth, passed down through generations. And as the world changed, as it always does, the balance of light and dark would remain forever in the hands of those willing to listen, to sacrifice, and to protect. Years passed, and the world continued to evolve under Mira's guidance. The land flourished, and a new sense of peace spread throughout the villages. Yet, there were whispers in the air, carried by the wind's whispers of a new darkness. An unknown force that threatened the fragile harmony that had been established. Mira felt the stirrings of unrest. She could no longer ignore the sense that something was amiss, something beyond her understanding. It began with small disturbances. The plants no longer grew as they once did. Animals started to behave unpredictably. And the stars flickered ominously in the night sky. The rivers, once clear and pure, began to darken as if tainted by some unseen force. She knew that the balance was once again in jeopardy. Mira gathered the elders of the villages, as well as the wisest of the sages, hoping they could offer insight into the growing imbalance. Among them was her grandmother, now aged but still wise, who had once guided Mira to her destiny as the new guardian. The darkness is no longer a mere shadow, her grandmother spoke, her voice filled with a quiet urgency. It is a force of its own, born from the remnants of a time long past. It is seeking to break free of the balance we have worked so hard to maintain. Mira's heart sank. But what can we do? The guardians of old are no longer here to help. The sage, an ancient man with eyes as deep as the night sky, looked at her with a grave expression. The guardians are never truly gone, Mira. They exist in every corner of this world, within the trees, the rivers, the very stones beneath our feet. But the time has come for you to awaken the true power within you. You must journey to the source, the birthplace of all light and darkness, and there you will find the key to restoring the balance. Mira's mind raced as she tried to understand the gravity of the task. The source. She had heard legends of it, an ancient and sacred place where light and shadow had first collided. But no one had seen it for centuries, and the path to it was said to be treacherous and full of uncertainty. "What if I fail?" she whispered, the weight of her responsibility pressing heavily upon her. Her grandmother placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You will not fail, Mira. The balance is not something you control, it is something you preserve. Trust in yourself, in the power that flows through you. The guardians have never truly left. They are within you, guiding you still." With a heavy heart, Mira set off on her journey. She ventured deep into the mountains, beyond the familiar lands she had once known, following the ancient path that led to the source. The forest grew darker, and the air grew colder as she ventured further into the unknown. The stars above seemed dimmer now, as if they, too, were uncertain about the path ahead. Days turned into weeks, and Mira faced countless trials along the way. The path was fraught with dangers, wild beasts, treacherous terrain, and illusions that sought to confuse and lead her astray. But with every step, she felt the presence of Leora and Elara, soft whispers that guided her, encouraging her to push forward, to never lose hope. At the edge of a vast, blackened forest, Mira felt a strange pull, a deep, almost magnetic force that seemed to draw her toward it. The trees here were twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. This was the border of the void, the edge of all things. It was a place where the forces of light and darkness collided, a place of great power. As Mira entered the heart of the forest, she felt a shift in the air. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and the very atmosphere seemed to vibrate with energy. At the center of the forest stood a towering stone structure, its surface covered in ancient runes that pulsed with a soft, ethereal light. This was the source, the birthplace of all creation. Mira approached cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. The closer she got, the stronger the pull became. The stone walls of the structure seemed to hum with an ancient power, and as she touched the surface, a vision overtook her. She saw the history of the world unfold before her eyes, an endless cycle of creation, destruction, light, and darkness. The struggle between balance and chaos had never ended, and it never would. "Mira," a voice whispered, clear and strong. It was the voice of Leora. The source is not a place, it is a force. It is the very essence of what sustains the world. And now, it is in danger. Myra's hands shook as she placed them against the stone. What must I do? You must unite the light and the dark within yourself, Alara's voice answered, a calm, steady presence. The source needs balance, and only by embracing both light and darkness can you restore it. The darkness you feel growing is not an enemy, it is a part of the world. It must be brought back into harmony with the light. Only then can the true balance be restored. Mira stood before the source, torn between the light and the dark. The forces pulled at her from within, each one fighting for dominance. The light filled her with hope and clarity, but the dark stirred within her, reminding her of the depth and complexity of the world. The light was not enough without the dark, and the dark was not complete without the light. With a deep breath, Mira closed her eyes, embracing both forces within her. She allowed the light to fill her, pushing away the fear and doubt. And then she welcomed the darkness, understanding that it, too, had a place in the balance of all things. As she did, the source responded, glowing brighter, its energy shifting and merging with hers. The world trembled as the forces of light and dark collided, but instead of destroying everything, they merged in harmony. The balance was restored. As Mira emerged from the source, the world around her began to change. The stars above sparkled brighter, the rivers ran clear once more, and the earth hummed with the rhythm of life. The darkness, no longer a threat, flowed seamlessly with the light, creating a world that was richer, fuller, and more complete. Mira knew that her journey was far from over. The balance was not something that could ever be taken for granted. It was a responsibility that would continue through the ages. But now, with the knowledge of both light and darkness within her, she was ready. The story of the Guardians was far from finished. It had only just begun again. Today's story ends here. See you later.